Welcome back, elevators, to another episode of Stiletto Talks. Today, we are going to be talking with Timmy Como. She is the founder of the Style Lottery, a not for profit whose mission is to transform the lives of women and their communities through sustainable fashion and fashion as philanthropy. She's also the author of Winning the Style Lottery, a book that we will actually be talking a little bit about in this conversation with her. And she's also a coach at the Pivot Strategist, a career coaching firm. This is the third conversation that we are having about professional look, right? The first conversation we had with Elisa Whitfield, where we talked pretty generally about executive presence, which appearance is a part of executive presence, which also includes communication and confidence. And appearance is like said to be 20%. I think I would argue that. But that's what we talked about in the first segment. In the second segment, we spoke with Sarisa Richardson, where we talked a little bit more about the evolution of professional dress, professional fashion. Now, this time around, we're talking a little bit more about the creative side of fashion and style. So really was looking forward to this conversation with Timmy. And I love that we went into a lot of different aspects of that creative work, right? So we talk about dress code. We talk a little bit more about stiletto brunch. Always excited and happy to talk about stiletto brunch. So we get into a lot of different things. So make sure that you tune in to the conversation if those are topics that you are interested in. But as always, make sure you like this video if you learned anything and just enjoy the topic. Hit that like button. Make sure you also subscribe. And then lastly, make sure that you also hit the notification bell so you get notified of future episodes. But without further ado, tune in to the conversation. All right. So thank you, Timmy, for being with us today. I am excited to continue this conversation around executive presence. This is our third installment of the conversation. We started the conversation with really just talking about executive presence in general. Then we kind of shifted into talking about the history of style and fashion when it comes to work. And I've been waiting for this one to talk specifically more about personal style and fashion, how that can, affect your appearance and affect the way that we are perceived in the workplace. And so I'm excited to have Timmy here to share her perspectives and her experiences. So we'll jump right into it. And this is becoming like one of my favorite questions to kick off my conversations with. But what do you call what you wear to work? Because I'm learning that people refer to it differently. I call it career wear, and I say this like every video, but I call it career wear. But you can see it's coming out a little funny, so I'm kind of shift my language to say something else, whether it's workplace fashion, office wear, or whatever. What do you call it?
Yeah, I think I probably go by the last word is the more important word to me, capsule. And I think I make it a work capsule with the idea that you probably have pieces in there that you mix and match. And these work capsule items might show up in your casual life, but they're probably primarily bought for work. And they might show up at brunch, they might show up running errands. But this idea that your style is fluid and flexible and it's not stapled to a particular place or function. So I love a good capsule, but I probably go by the term work capsule.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that concept because like saying it out loud that you're not like tying it to a specific place. And I think that's where sometimes not only I get hung up, but other people probably get hung up with that as well, like career wear,
Right.
workplace fashion, and you feel like these are things that I just wear to work.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas even in my own personal style, I find myself really mixing and blurring the lines a lot more. Like I'll put on literally workout gear and throw my blazer over top and go
Right.
do the venue walkthrough. And
Yeah.
I still think I look pretty polished.
And
Um,
I'm sure you do. Yeah.
so I like
Mm-hmm.
that. What's your workplace capsule?
Yeah.
All right. So, like I said, this is our third installment in this conversation. And when we at first kicked it off with just talking about executive presence, we all kind of agreed and established that executive presence includes gravitas, which is in short,
Mm-hmm.
like confidence.
Right.
Also includes communication, where we not just speak, but we speak with our hands too. So it's more than just
Yeah.
words. We all know communication is more than just words, but then also appearance. So we had
Mm-hmm.
talked about that as well. Started that conversation. We talked about different stereotypes and how genetics and culture can play into our clothing choices and we're perceived at work. And one of the more popular pieces in that piece of the conversation that comes up is, especially when we think about Black women and women of color, women who are just curvier in
Mm-hmm.
general, and some of the different stigmas on what that are placed on what we wear and how we show up.
Right.
Wear something too tight, it's inappropriate. Furthermore, curvy, but it's okay for someone who's not as curvy. So where do we draw those lines and boundaries? And
Mm-hmm.
we also talked about like just a general history and progression of workwear, what we wear to work. So
Yeah.
what's your take on any of that? Like what do you think about when you think about what we wear to work, what we wear to work in particular as women of color, and how that
Mm-hmm.
can affect like our career progression? I think you have a unique position to talk about this, just given, what you do for work and your varying interests.
Yeah, I think when you were speaking there, I just kept thinking about this idea of just self-awareness. And I think we often don't consider how much self-awareness it takes to be a fashionable person and being fashionable in a way that's authentic to you. So, to your point earlier about varying sizes and how you have to dress yourself differently if you are of different types of shape, it's not even as simple as small, medium, large. It's like you could be all kinds of different sizes all throughout your body and thinking about, okay, I know how I felt this morning when I put this outfit on. I also know how I might come across to other people who are meeting me and have no idea who I am. And in the book, I talk about, and often throughout my work, about how your clothing and your appearance speaks volumes before you even open your mouth. And that is the unfortunate thing about bias, but because we know that, we can play it to our advantage. If we know there's a specific type of message that we want to give, we can be very strategic about the kind of clothing that we wear, giving people an opportunity to see, okay, this is what I'm about. I love the idea that workwear or work capsule, whatever we want to call it, doesn't have to look the same for everyone. For example, when I first started my career, I was a teacher. And I had this idea that teachers had to look a certain way. I was trying to channel like Miss Frizzle and like just, it was not working for me because I thought I had to look so mature and so put together. And I aged myself to the point where I think I was 24 in the classroom, but my students could not put a finger on what my age was, mostly because they're middle schoolers and they don't have a good concept of age. But also, I looked like maybe a decade older than I actually was because I was dressing more mature because I thought that's what I had to do. So I love this idea that for yourself, the more self aware you are aware of the message or the identity you want to portray, and you strategically dress yourself that way, a way that is appropriate for your title or your position, but also appropriate and true to who you are. And there's a lot of flexibility there. We kind of have to break the mold in our mind of what we think that ought to look like. But in the work that I do, I love to talk about how much flexibility there actually is in the workplace and what you wear. And we have to let go of this idea that Black means I'm serious. If I'm head to toe in Black, yeah, Black is chic. But there are also many ways to give off the same energy that Black gives, but in a way that makes sense to you.
I love that. In particular, the self-aware piece.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this already, and we'll get to it a little bit later to talk more about your book, but it's not really things you think about, especially at the early stages of your career. It's not
Yeah.
really things that we're thinking about is when we're thinking about our style and clothing choice when we go to work. To your point of saying when you started out as a teacher and you're like, I have to look this type of way as a teacher. And even just mentioning people wearing Black because if they feel like it takes them serious, which makes me think about in politics, red and blue are the go-to
Mm-hmm.
colors, and not even just to symbolize Democrat or Republican. Like it's red is a power color.
Mm-hmm.
Blue can elicit emotions like out of people. So even just thinking about simple color choices like that is takes a level of self-awareness. Like if I don't
Mm-hmm.
look good in red, I might not want to wear red to show
Right.
power, I would have to look at another option. So I think that's
Mhm.
so important to drive home. And I'm sure it's going to come up again in this conversation about being self-aware and coming from a place of self-awareness to make those clothing choices. Because I know it came
Mhm.
up a couple times in the other conversations where we basically said executive presence is really all about your personal brand. And to have a personal
Mhm.
brand, you have to have some level of self-awareness, like who are you and what are you doing and who are you doing it for. So I think
Right.
that's a really important point.
I think there's a level of experimentation though that we have to allow ourselves, right? So for me, I love a navy anything. I used to be all about black, but I was like, oh, I love navy. Navy just looks great. And figuring out what cuts flattered me or what kind of, length of certain outfits. And it seems so, something about fashion sometimes seems very fluffy or unimportant at times. But if we think about it like self-expression,
Mm-hmm.
or authenticity or it being tied to our expression of our identity, I think we would take it more seriously. It's worth taking time to figure out like, oh, I look better in crop pants than I do in flared pants. It's so simple, but if we show up more confident and more comfortable, there's something that translates into the way that we work also. It reminds me of like when people used to have school uniforms and it's like, oh, we have to wear the same thing. But
Mm-hmm.
then after a while, you start to realize that some people wore that same uniform differently because
True.
they had accessories or they had things that they, really felt like made the outfit pop. And so we are adults now. We don't have to wear a uniform unless we want to. I love a uniform. Like I made one for my work, but it's a uniform that I made. It's not something that someone said, you have to do it this way. So I think we have to remind ourselves we're adults and we have the freedom to color outside the lines or figure out what our version of staples or classics look like. And so that self awareness, but also giving yourself time to experiment, no matter where you are in your career, especially as you change positions. So I used to work in as a teacher, but then in my other life, I worked in university admissions. So it was a very front facing job. And I met people all the time. And I was talking to people in front of so many people. And I realized that people responded to me based on how I presented myself, how I was dressed. So I'm also Nigerian. So there would be days where I'm like, I'm going to wear a Nigerian blazer. It's a blazer. It's appropriate for the workplace. But then I would realize I would get different questions and different types of conversations. I just had to own it to say, intersectionally, I'm Black, I'm Nigerian, I'm a woman, I'm relatively young for this position. I know that that affects the way people receive me. And so the clothing choices I make, I have to experiment and see what payoff it gives me. And I found the more authentic I was, I recruited more diverse students because they could see me from a mile away, like, oh, that person is like really standing in her truth. She's a professional, but she's showing up in a professional way that makes sense for her. So I encourage everyone to be self aware, but also give themselves time to experiment and not just rely on the classics. Maybe the classics are a good foundation building block, but use that and then take it to wherever you want it to go.
Yeah, so like thinking about my own experiences, I've always been cute and comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've always done well for myself in the way that I've dressed myself, especially when it comes to my career and being in professional settings. I think I've done a pretty good job just instinctually. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that if I was thinking about it from a place of strategy, as
Mm-hmm.
well, that I probably would have made some different clothing choices. Because I erred on the side of, okay, do I think I look good in this? And am I comfortable in this? Granted, there are times where I wore things that weren't as comfortable just for the look.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never really, until more recently, really put a lot of thought into what do I want to communicate with
Mm-hmm.
what I'm wearing. So I think that's another layer that we don't often think about, especially as a young professional or a student, like just now getting into the workforce. We just want to, I'm gonna go to Dress for Success or wherever. I'm gonna get that
Mm-hmm.
suit so I could, get this interview and get this job. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not often that we take that time to think like, I want to communicate a certain thing beyond just dress for the job that you want,
Mm-hmm.
opposed to really coming from a place of self. And I really like this conversation because it's really coming from that place of self and not coming from,
Mm-hmm.
this is what people say you should wear. this is what you're supposed to wear here, this is what you're supposed to wear there, because it can be tricky. I've never really
Hmm.
fully understood when the dress codes come, and when dress codes come out, I'm always the first, like, can you show me some examples? Like,
Hmm.
what's this
Hmm.
supposed to look like? So I think coming from your own self and coming from a place of confidence is great advice.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting it a little bit. I'm all about data and stats. I'm always looking at them, and I'm always doing that to prep for different conversations. I've been reading this book called Beauty Pays, by Daniel Hammermesh. He's like the guy for, I think they're calling like Poltronomics or whatever. But essentially, he just talks about how beauty plays a role in how much money you make. And we've written about this quite a few, at least twice on the She's a Boss blog. I know we recently updated a version earlier this year. But one of the stats that stood out, right, is basically comparing men and women and saying that for men, the better they look, it's going to have a bigger impact on their salary than for women. If a man who, I think there was a 5 point rating scale, and the number 5 was like very good looking. I don't think that's the exact word, but number 5 for men who rated a 5, they can earn 17% more than average looking men. And then women who are rated a 5 can earn up to 8% more than average looking women. So I thought that was interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're literally just looking at the way you look, like from shoulder up. They weren't looking
Hmm.
at clothes. So like my question to you is like, how important to your overall appearance um is your clothing choices? Like, what's the impact that your clothing choices can have on your overall appearance?
Yeah. Ah, such a sobering kind of piece of research to think about. But before I answer that, it made me think of this other research that I'd heard about how when you wear makeup, the more there's a level of makeup wearing that makes you seem more competent, right? And
Yeah.
so no makeup, it's like, I don't know if she's really competent. Medium amount, like, oh, she could probably do her job pretty well. Too much makeup, and people are like, oh, she probably only cares about hair and makeup and is probably not very competent. So, especially as women, we're always trying to straddle that line of, I tried, but I'm not doing too much. It doesn't consume everything that I do. So, makeup is a really interesting place in opposition to something like clothing, right? Because the structure of our face, our beauty inherently without any augmentation, it is what it is. It can't be changed. Makeup is something that can enhance that, right? Men don't have the same way. I guess you could say an edge up can change a whole man's life and be like, oh my gosh, that's a different guy. So that is a similar thing. But I think fashion or style, I should say style is really more my focus rather than fashion. Style can do wonders, I feel. Anyone can take their God-given features and dress them in a way to really augment or accentuate or enhance what's already there. So I think style is very important. It can really level you up in ways that can get you to that next step. And I find it very unfortunate that as human beings, we haven't evolved past that. Oh, you look really great. And so I probably like you more and I probably see you as more competent or I want to pay you more money. But that is how bias sits when it comes to looking at people. But I think style can be one of the great equalizers, that it's not necessarily about money. It's really about finding pieces that decorate the form that you are blessed with. All right. So it's even with hair, I noticed both of us have locks. We could have chosen to wear our froze, but we have locks and locks show up in a very distinctive way. And so it's kind of the choices that you make, the style that you use. And I think style can really help elevate a person in ways that, just beauty alone can't do. So I think it's probably different for men. A good suit can also change a man's life. But I think for women, the combination of makeup and style, you have a little more control than you would if you just didn't make an effort. So there is definitely room for us to get to those levels. I do think that there is that mindset of who is beautiful, right? There is that standard of beauty that it's probably skewed more European than Afrocentric. And so you'll probably see that they're looking for a certain type of look. But I'm loving that we're seeing more women show that professional looks like me and professional looks like you. And so there's flexibility there. We have to be okay with maybe being a different type of professional or a different type of beautiful. But I think style can definitely make a difference.
I love what you said about style being a great equalizer because, that's very true in saying that, again, the study with the numbers that I rattled off, it was based on essentially innate features.
Yeah.
Like I was born with cheekbones like this. My
Mhm.
nose was born this.
10 points.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like she's symmetrical, which symmetry is really a big thing when it
Yeah.
comes to beauty. The more symmetrical you are, the more beautiful you're going to be perceived, regardless of if you have big cheekbones or little cheekbones. But
Mhm.
kind of touching back to the differences that the men get with like being considered beautiful or attractive, how they get more than double the premium that women would get. I wonder if that stems from the pressure and the expectations that just society has, in particular US society. I've been clear to kind of make that note in these conversations that I'm talking about United States, Western,
Right.
because it's very different on the other side of the world. But wondering if it's because of that standard of women are expected to be beautiful. Like we're expected to look a certain way. Like that type of pressure is not necessarily put on men. Like the study that you mentioned with makeup, that was the original article we had wrote about, kind of touching on those points, because that was real interesting. And they didn't use men in that study because
Mhm.
they're not really out here showing up to the job in a full face or what have you. So they
Right.
didn't use men in that study. So it makes me wonder if as women we're already putting that pressure on ourselves, but then societally, it's like you have to be pretty to
Yeah.
work here, to come across here. Like there's whole businesses built on that, like Hooters, for example,
Mhm.
whole business concepts built on being pretty.
Yeah, but to your point, that kind of shows like where the ceiling is and where the floor is, right? For us, at the very minimum, people are expecting that we're showing up like that. I woke up like this type of
Mm-hmm.
feeling that at the very least, you have like a face of make something you tried, right? And so for us, that's the floor. Like you had to at least try to do something. If you're doing hair and makeup and lashes, that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
For men, it's this is gonna sound so misogynistic and terrible, but like for men, it's like, oh, you rolled out of bed and you put on your pants correctly. Awesome. Like the expectation for how put together men ought to be is very, very standard, very low. And so I think most professional men do take pride in what they wear and do show up, with the dress code and all those things. But for a man to look good, that standard is like you wore a button down. You probably there's something in the dress code about, having your beard trimmed to a certain extent, but
But
um, rarely is HR talking to men about their wardrobe. They're not those types of expectations or those types of conversations. So there definitely is a pressure. And for women, we have to find a way to not enmesh our identity with the dress code and
mm-hmm.
with all those things, because you can really start to feel like, oh, if they don't accept the way that I show up, maybe they don't accept me at all. And you can really conflate the two things, but they are slightly different, but it can make it very difficult because the standards, like you mentioned, are quite high for women. And we're expected to, at the very least, show up, done up in some
Yep.
way. And the women who don't rise to that standard do get penalized. So
Mm-hmm.
whether that is, how people want to collaborate with them at work, or if they're getting promotions, or if they are getting asked to be on projects, like it does show up for us as women, almost like being punished for not being as pretty
Mm-hmm.
as we are expected to.
Yep. I don't have those specific numbers on here. I might have the place mark, but it does talk about the ugly penalty, right? So for men or women who are okay, yeah. So for women, and actually these numbers do include some of those additional factors like education, size of the city or the region that you live in. So these numbers try to incorporate some of that, even age, because as we get past a certain age, then our looks start to decline, or at least in perception. But it
Yeah.
says that for women, if you are below average, and that's like you're scoring a 2 or a 1, that's a 4% penalty on your salary. For men, the penalty is actually a lot more, right? It's 13%.
Oh, wow.
They have a 13% penalty.
Hmm. I and I have this thought when you were talking about the standards in the US versus other countries, I was thinking about people's, and so I have to almost take back some of what I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it's just, they just show up, right? There's obviously a standard there. But even for men, for a man to be seen as a man in the workplace, even the way he speaks, how low his voice is, how commanding he is, if he walks into a room, how tall he is, like these are all things that come into play about how much of a leader a man is perceived as. So I think for men, some of the spots or positions they're vying for is really trying to look at their leadership potential, right? So some of that does come into play when it's like, oh, a man who is a leader looks like this. This is the archetype. And so if a man doesn't fall into that, he's not getting that spot. So I can totally see how that penalty there can really hurt a man, almost even more than being good looking. Like it can hurt you to not look like a leader, to not be perceived like a leader. So I could definitely see how that research matches that.
Yeah, I think even regardless of how high the premium is or how high the penalty is, like the general consensus is that your looks are important.
Mm-hmm.
The way you show up just physically, your appearance, it matters a
Yeah.
great deal, because even to that point, a man with a deeper voice, he's going to typically be perceived as a better leader. I just heard on the radio, men who are funny are perceived as smarter. It's the things that we just come up with is it's insane. But then even for women, it's like the longer your hair is, the less likely you're going to be perceived as a leader. So it's like the shorter your hair is, like, and if you look at movies and stuff, you'll kind of see that pattern play out, like as the more power a woman has, her hair is typically like shoulder length. Like it starts getting short, the higher she climbs, shorter
Yeah.
her hair gets. So it's very interesting. I think it probably plays into that point you mentioned about the makeup. Like if they're wearing so much makeup, there's going to be the idea of she's so concerned with her looks that she's not going to be a good employee. But it's like the longer the hair, the more maintenance. So I don't really know like all the factors that are playing into these perceptions, but it's really doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes.
Yeah. And, as you're saying it, it's grieving me because when I think about the phenomenal male leaders I've had and phenomenal women leaders I've had, they've been great in their own right and they've led in different ways due to their wiring. Right. And so I think when we try to say, in order to be a good leader, a woman has to act like a man, I don't think that makes sense. In order to be a compassionate leader, a man has to act like a woman. I don't think that's true because, first of all, the idea of what men and women do, it really varies amongst people. And so I think for the most part, some of our wiring as women, or even I should say how we're socialized as women to lead, if we were empowered to lead in that way that is authentic to who we are, we would find that organizations would run better, right? So the women leaders that I've had have been really great interpersonally, because, the kind of conversations we would have, it's not necessarily, oh, they were caring, but women had conversations. The women leaders I had conversations with their teams in very different ways. And some of the male leaders I had were really strong programmatically, and they led their teams in certain different ways. And so I think when we say, in order to lead well within your gender, you have to perform this way, it can be really problematic. It can rob people of showing up as leaders in an authentic and effective way. And many of us who have been led well have gained really great leadership experience from all sorts of people from different genders. And so for us to now say, like, okay, if I'm going to be a strong leader, I probably should have shorter hair. I should probably wear a medium amount of makeup. I should, like, it's just so much that you have to think about, which is why I keep going all the way back to what is authentic to you? How can you form a form of leadership or showing up at work in a way that is fitting to how you are wired on the inside? Yes, take great lessons from all over the place. But if you feel like coming to work requires you to overhaul your entire personality, that doesn't make sense. And it's not going to last very long.
Right.
That's what I think.
Agreed. Which that's actually a great segue to this final piece of the conversation, where we get to talk about your book, which I love that you have the frame on your wall back there. I see it. Up.
Yay.
Okay. Definitely a nice quick read, y'all, on Amazon. I thought it was the cutest size and everything.
The
Um,
idea is like if you have an interview, you tuck it into your bag and nobody knows, like, oh, am I wearing the right thing? Like, hopefully you figured that out before the interview, but there you go.
right. But I enjoy the book. But I
Thank
really
you.
want to give you the opportunity to like talk about it a little bit. I know, but I'll say the two pieces that stood out to me after. So I'll let you take the floor just to tell us a little bit about your book, Winning the Style Lottery.
Yeah. Thank you once again for the opportunity to share. So I wrote this book as someone who has pivoted in my career. I guess I'm on my third, fourth pivot right now. And so, whether I was teaching or I was at the university or as I at a nonprofit, I found that I was always trying to reinvent myself. And it was kind of an exhausting process of just thinking about what workwear or work capsule fits for the role that I'm in. And then I started to figure out like it makes more sense to make my work fit me, right? Make my work fit the kind of person I want to show up as. I shouldn't be changing every single time I come to a new job. And so I wanted to write something that was a quick guide to getting dressed. And so if I can kind of spell out the basics of getting dressed for work, I wanted to do that. So um, I wanted to make it very easy. There's a page on here that has like a chart where you look at the shape of your body. You might not know like what kind of things should I use to accentuate my body. I'm 5'2" personally, and I want to be able to know like what quick things could I look for. And when I first started teaching, I didn't have a whole lot of money. I was on a teacher's salary. I wanted to make it so that people knew they didn't have to spend a lot of money in order to create their own personal style. And then I also wanted to dispel some of the ideas like, okay, well, if they say it's business casual or it's professional, how do I show up? And so all of the parts that make people nervous, I used to do a lot of interview prep and working with people doing internships or starting jobs for the first time. And that was the part that was causing so much anxiety. And I just thought to myself, if we can remove that anxiety inducing part, they can figure out the rest of the stuff, which they're already smart enough to do. So that's really why I wrote this book. I wanted to help women from all over the place get dressed in a way that's authentic and consistent throughout their career. Yeah.
So I know you didn't lean into it too much just now, but I definitely want to highlight when I got the book, number one, I got it off of a suggestion from a mutual connection of ours, Gwen Weber McLeod. And I was like, I was
Yay.
interested in it. I wanted to, have this conversation with you. So I didn't like read the description or anything. I just know I was going to get it and I was going to read it. So I didn't know what to expect. So I was pleasantly surprised that really for me, like two aspects stood out in the book. You just really focus a lot just now in your blurb about it, like the practical aspects that you put in the book. But then you actually spend like the first half of the book. There was some practical pieces mixed in that first half, but you spent a lot of time talking about your purpose and your mindset, which we've spent a lot of this conversation talking about already. But can you expand just a little bit more on, it might just be summarizing some of the points you already made, but I really just want to drive home that like your style really comes from who you are inside, and what
Yeah.
you wear is just dressing that up.
Yeah. Thank you for noticing that. I wanted it to be more than just a guidebook, but one of the chapters in there is called Know Thyself. And that used to be my mantra. I think it's really important to know why you're on this earth. Even if your job changes, the essence of who you are pretty much stays the same. You might evolve tweak by tweak, but I think a woman who knows herself really can do anything. And before you start getting dressed, you should know who you're dressing. And so I spend a lot of time, really, it's like a lot of affirmation at the beginning. Like, did you know you were designed on purpose for a purpose? You got to know that. I have to drive that home for you. And yes, that's a big part for me because I think a lot of times we spend a lot of our lives chasing who we think we ought to be. And then there is a true version of ourselves that the world needs. And we just kind of hold back because we're like, maybe we're too big for the world, or maybe they're not ready for us. But if we spent time really courting that person on the inside and getting to know her, to be like, oh, well, this person inside of me is very playful. Okay, if I know that about myself, I dress myself differently. This person is authentic, or she is a little showy. Like those things that you know about yourself will always translate into the way that you dress but it's important to sit and take time to know who you are first. And so it's a part that we skip. I think a good stylist would know how to like figure out who you are, what you want to represent yourself as, but you have to know that for yourself too. So as a person of faith, a lot of my identity comes from the time I spent with God. I had a sabbatical period where I didn't work for a year, and God kind of stripped me of all my titles. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, who am I? And it was like, you have to know who you are without a title. You know, a lot of women, when they become mothers, it's like, am I a mom now? You're still that awesome person, but you have this additional title of mom or this additional title of CEO. And it's so easy to lose yourself. But I think finding yourself and celebrating that woman is a really important thing to do for everyone. So yeah, knowing thyself is really, really important. Yeah.
So true. And I had like one more like official question, which we've touched on it a lot here, but just to kind of drive the point home, especially for my students, young professionals that might be tuning in. But essentially, we already know knowing yourself and having that type of mindset is important to before you even put the clothes on your body. But then we also talk about when you're starting your career, we have to kind of juggle both at the same time, knowing ourselves, but also being appropriate at
Yeah.
work. So like what are your thoughts or tips or whatever around that balancing act of I'm still figuring myself out, but I still want to wear something I'm comfortable in. Like I know for me, in which you kind of reaffirming some of my initial choices that I thought were kind of shallow before I even got into the work world. Like I think I was still deciding on my major in undergrad at this point, but all I knew was that I wanted to work somewhere where I could dress up, where I could be cute to go to work. I didn't even know
Yeah.
what field I wanted to be in, but I just know I wanted to be cute
Mm-hmm.
when I got there. All right. And I used to think like, wow, you're so shallow. Like that's how you're like making your choices. But this conversation is like kind of so like that's valid. Like if that's how you
Yeah.
want to show up to work, then that has an impact on your
Mm-hmm.
career choices. There was a period of my life where I was wearing a lot of black, but in retrospect, when I've thought about it, it's like I think I was probably wearing black because people like wearing black is cool or whatever the case is. But really, I'm a bold person. Like I might be
Mm-hmm.
pretty introverted for the most part. I'm not the center of attention, really. I'm not always the one saying the most in a room, but things I say have impact. And, I show that a little bit more in my clothing now because I'm wearing brighter colors. I'm
Mm-hmm.
wearing like a more cheeky piece than I would
Mm-hmm.
have. But that's after many years of trial and error and getting to know myself, still getting to know myself. But
Yeah.
for our young professionals, and what are some ways they can start to figure that out for themselves while they're still trying to get to their bag?
Yeah. I love that you talked about what experimentation looked like for you. I too am on that journey of looking at the staples and being like, ooh, is there a colorful version of this staple that I can have? You know? And for me, mine even started very small. I tend to wear a red lip whenever I can. And for me, that was just my own personal like rebellious type of thing. I'd heard all throughout my life, like, oh, if you have full lips, you should probably not be doing too much. And so I remember I cut my hair in college, had my teeny weeny afro, and started wearing red lipstick at the same time to be like, oh, okay, I'm dark skinned, but I can wear bright red lipstick and it's okay. The world's not going to end. But when I started working, there's a page in the book that has like the office dress code chart, business formal, business professional, all those things. I had to know what the frame was, like what are the parameters, right? Because I think a dress code is not supposed to be imprisonment. It's supposed to give you the parameters of what you are expected to wear, I should say. And so for me, just seeing the chart and saying, oh, okay, this is the expectations. These are the expectations. Then my mind would creatively start to think, well, what are the creative avenues I have within that parameter? And so if they say that I can wear dresses, did they say what type of dresses that they have to be? No, I can wear patterns. I can wear two-piece that looks like a dress, so being a little more creative and thinking about what are the parameters, what are creative ways I can approach these parameters. And most of the time I didn't feel imprisoned by them. But I think for you, especially if you're a young professional just starting your career, I would say look at whatever the office parameters you were given and then start to think about how you can be creative inside of those. And this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but when I was building my work wardrobe, I was shopping at Forever 21. And I remember there was a time I had like a bodycon and a blazer, but I'm teaching seventh grade boys. So I was like, that's not going to work. So I put like a skirt on top of the bodycon. So I was like, oh, it's a top. And so I was thinking about all these creative ways to use what I already had to build this wardrobe or this look that I was going for. And so even I was actually a fashion blogger when I was teaching. And so when I got over my, oh, I want to look like Frizzle, Miss Frizzle phrase, I just thought, okay, let me start being my authentic self. And then really my second year, I really started to explore all the different combinations I could do. So I would say kind of what we spoke about earlier, but still experiment, figure out what your authentic self is, but then also look at the creativity within the parameters that you're given. Oftentimes, they're not trying to tell you exactly where to shop and what to wear. They're just telling you these are the expectations and what people typically show up as. But as long as you're not being inappropriate, usually what you do creatively within that parameter is up to you.
That's awesome advice. And that actually sparks one last question before we go. And this has to do with our upcoming Stiletto brunch. The vision that we have for at this point is pretty solid, and our vision is to be the Met Gala of professional development.
Ooh, nice.
So kind of referring back to the chart you had mentioned in your book, and I even put a note up there. I don't think you can see it. My ring might be doing the most, but at the very top, you have business formal, and you put this means you likely be expected to wear a pantsuit or a skirt suit, along with conservative accessories and typically closed-toe shoes. So I put a note on there, and I'm like, this is a stiletto brunch dress code, but for stiletto brunch, it's a little bit more glam. So for a stiletto brunch, it will be more like glam business formal. So by me saying that, what would be your interpretation of glam business formal?
Yeah, if it's glam business formal, I'd probably go with the dress because I think it says you can do a pantsuit. You could wear a fancy pantsuit if you wanted to, but I'd probably go with the dress. And a dress, I think if I was at work, I would care more about sleeves, but if it's a glam formal type thing, business formal, yeah, I would go with the dress. I would pick a print that I really liked. If it's, I feel like you can wear glitter. I feel like if you wanted
I wore
to
a full sequin pantsuit last year.
There you go.
Sequin pantsuit. And the year before that, it was like lanterns. It was like exaggerated lantern sleeve with some high-waisted pants that I could wear to work, but the top, not so much. It was off the shoulder, exaggerated sleeves.
Yes. So that's what I'm envisioning, like something that doesn't have to play by all the work rules. But I love the piece that you're saying that like you could wear it to work if you made some adjustments, but usually if you're doing business formal, you'd be careful about the kind of colors that you're working with. Let me also say, as a woman of color, as a Black woman, the range that we have in colors that look suitable for us is quite wide. So I always like to encourage us to, not be afraid of color. Roy G. Biv it out, like whatever hue you think makes sense to you. So brighter colors I would go with, patterns that are a little louder and bolder. I'd also play with textures. It doesn't always have to be something that's a solid texture. It could be, if you're wearing a tweed suit, or if you're wearing chiffon, silk, whatever, something that's a little more elevated. Think more so, oh, I'm going to an event after work, a fancy event after work, Yes, if you had to go back to the office to get something, it would be okay. But like something fancier for that. So I think that's a great dress code. That sounds like a lot of fun.
That hit. I'm envisioning, because I'm getting a custom dress done, and I'm just envisioning that and what we talked about, and with your description, I think we're hitting it. Definitely.
Yay.
Old pattern. Definitely, we got some sleeve action going on. I love me some fancy sleeves. But that's awesome. I love that. But other than that like covers everything I wanted to cover. Do you have any final parting words that you want to share with our audience?
Yes. I think at the beginning I was talking about a capsule. And I just wanted to leave people with this idea that you can build a capsule for yourself and for yourself at work. And it doesn't have to be a uniform that you stick to all the time. Even for me in working at home, I have some pieces that I kind of cycle in And I make sure not to wear them on the same day that I have meetings with the same people. But, they're outfits that I just know if I have to show up on Zoom, we're good. So I think I would encourage everyone to build a capsule at some point in their careers, especially now is a good time to start thinking about pieces that are, if you're working from home, comfortable, but also present well on camera, whatever present well looks like to you, right? So um, for me, even with hair and things like that, like these are locks. Locks are going to do what locks do. So I have to make sure that I show up in a way that I feel comfortable and confident. And so I love showing up as a Black woman in these spaces. So there are certain parts of your identity that you just can't hide, especially when you're on screen. So make sure you're building a capsule that accentuates the things that you're really proudest of, some of your best features. So whether it's doing your eye makeup in a certain way or, wearing less makeup because you're, thinking about your skincare, but what else can you do? Is it fancy glasses? So all those types of things are part of your capsule. And nobody gets to tell you how to show up at work because they don't have to put in all the work that you do. So figure out what kind of work is comfortable for you to do and make sure you're showing up in a way that you would be proud of yourself. I think sometimes we give away our power too much. Like, oh, what does this person think? Are they paying your bills? Are they signing your check? They're really not. And so the people who actually have that kind of power, it's usually a handful of people, a couple people maybe, and the rest of the people just have opinions. So that's all. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Thank you. I love that you included jewelry could be a
Mhm.
part of your capsule. I
Yep.
definitely had my phase where I was all about the statement pieces. Um
Hmm.
I'm coming to a bit more of a balance now. But
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much, Simi,
My
for
pleasure.
your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'll
Okay.
make sure to drop all the links so you can run and get you the book. It's definitely something to
Yay.
consider first. The size is perfect. But other than that,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye, everyone.